You tonight. Thanks for being here for this period of Bible study on Wednesday night. In this Wednesday night class, we are studying famous Old Testament characters and seeing what we can learn for application in our lives from the lives and examples that they set. Some good examples, some bad examples, but you can learn from both kinds. And tonight we're going to talk about one of the best known Bible characters. Our lesson tonight is about David, King David. So we'll start out in 1 Samuel 16. If you want to turn there, 1 Samuel 16 is where our study begins. And in this first reference, we read where Samuel goes to the house of Jesse in order to ordain or appoint a king who will replace Saul. We know that King Saul had sinned and fallen way short of expectations for him and his kingship. God's not going to let his dynasty continue. It's going to be taken from him. And Samuel is given the job of anointing the one who will replace him. And so he goes to the house of Jesse. 1 Samuel 16 verse 1, the Lord said to Samuel, "How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thy horn with oil and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons." Okay, so Samuel's told to go to this specific man, his family, and that among his sons will be one who will be the new king to replace Saul. So he goes, and in verse 6, it came to pass when they were come that he looked on, so the sons of Jesse come to present themselves to Samuel. So he looked on Eliab and said, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart." There's really an important principle stated there, right? The Lord looks upon the heart. He doesn't judge by outward appearances. This Eliab, the oldest, I guess, of Jesse's sons, would have been the logical choice if you're just choosing from human reasoning. Human wisdom was that this guy, he's tall, he's handsome, he's got to be the right guy, right? No, man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, "Neither hath the Lord chosen this." Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by. He said, "Neither hath the Lord chosen this." Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, "The Lord hath not chosen these." And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, "There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep." And Samuel said unto Jesse, "Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither." And he sent and brought him in. He was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." And Samuel took the horn of oil, anointed him in the midst of the brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. So, of course, here's the selection of David. We know, of course, almost all the episodes that we'll be talking about tonight are well known, well remembered. But again, I think the really important principle here is what was stated there, that the man looks on the outward appearance, the Lord looks on the heart. And that is a key principle. It's still true and applicable in our lives. You know, we are prone to judge by appearances. I think sometimes we judge people by appearances. Maybe sometimes we judge churches by appearances. For instance, here's a particular fellow, and I think I don't like him. I'm not taken with him. I don't like his appearance. I don't like his lifestyle. I'm not even going to try to teach him the gospel, because I have judged it in my mind. A guy that looks like that, he would never be interested in obeying the gospel anyway, so there's really no reason for me to even try to share the gospel message with him. And so we judge that way, and we need to learn the principle stated here. Any thoughts or comments, anybody? Okay. So, in chapter 16, we have David's first sort of interaction with Saul's household. In chapter 16, at verse 14, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him." Now let's stop there for a minute. I'd love to hear your insights and what you think about an evil spirit from the Lord troubled Saul. What do you think about that? I thought, according to 1 John chapter 1, about verses 7 and 8, God is light, in him is no darkness at all. How could God send an evil spirit? How does God have anything to do with evil? Evil spirits, how does God have anything to do with that? How would you explain that? Anybody? Any thoughts on that? Tom?
Well, in the New Testament, Jesus talks about vessel being clean, or driving an evil spirit out, and he didn't replace it with anything, and something worse than was there came back in. So here, the Spirit of the Lord departed. There was, wasn't anything there to take its place, and something else would come in.
Okay, I think that's a possibility here, but
King James says this distressing spirit.
yes, I think this is the key. When we read evil spirit, we think evil, wicked, immoral, ungodly. We think that's what evil means, and it usually does. But sometimes the word evil just simply means bad or not pleasant. It doesn't necessarily mean wickedly sinful. And I think other translations, you referenced New King James, says a distressing spirit from the Lord came upon him. I think the English Standard Version says a harmful spirit came upon him. And another version I looked to used the word tormenting spirit came upon him. And so, if you think about that, you can almost imagine how that would be so. God was basically allowing him to be tormented by the fact that he had been disobedient, that he had not followed the instructions that God had given. He was troubled by this. This troubling spirit was upon him. And it very well had its roots in the fact that he knew that he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. John?
The Lord chastised the nation of Israel with wicked nations. They took them into captivity and whatever by wicked nations. Not that God created the wicked nation, but he used them for his purposes.
Okay. So God can use, even though he's not the origin of wickedness, he can use wickedness. He can use wicked people to accomplish his purpose, as you referenced. He used wicked nations to punish Judah. But I actually think in this case, this is not the idea of evil or wicked or sinful so much as it is just a troubling spirit. God allowed him to be troubled in his heart and his mind. He'd get in a frenzy. He'd get in a tizzy. And again, I think that probably a lot of it was because he knew the contrast between what God expected of him and what he had been doing and how he had been living. But you might want to make a note in your margin there, because sometimes that poses a challenge to us. How could God send an evil spirit? But other translations use words like distressing or tormenting or harmful. And so he was suffering almost like a mental disorder. But again, I would argue that it was rooted in his own disobedience to this point in time. All right, so when that happened, verse 15, Saul's servant said to him, "Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants, which are before thee, to seek out a man who is a cunning player on a harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well." And Saul said to his servants, "Provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me." Then answered one of the servants and said, "Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him." Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, "Send me David thy son, which is with the sheep." And Jesse took an ass laden with bread and a bottle of wine and a kid, and sent them by David to his son unto Saul. And David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took a harp and played with his hands. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. I think that probably confirms our thinking of what this was. This was just a horrible anxiety, a terrible state of mind that would come over Saul, so much so that just the playing of some pleasant music could calm him and put him at ease. So again, I don't think I don't think this evil spirit is the kind of, we just Sunday morning we were talking about Jesus casting out demons and evil spirits. I don't think this is that. I think this is just this troubled, frenzied mind that Saul had. And I think he was probably suffering some deep emotional or psychological issues, and just the playing of this music would calm him. Now, one of the things that I don't really have a good answer to is this suggests that David had quickly developed a close relationship with Saul. When we get a couple chapters later, when David kills Goliath, Saul says, "Who is that young man?" Well, you would have thought that he would recognize him, surely, based upon this closeness or this fondness that is described here. And I think probably, so just skip over real quickly to the end of chapter 17. When Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the captain of the host, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" And Abner said, "As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell." And the king said, "Inquire thou whose son this stripling is." And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son art thou, thou young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of thy servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." That's always been a curiosity to me, how in chapter 16, it's described as how fond that Saul immediately grew in regards to David. And then just a couple chapters later, when David kills the Goliath, Saul acts like he doesn't know who he is. I'm not sure there's a great explanation of that, except I would offer this as a possibility. Maybe that speaks to Saul's mental disorder. Maybe that speaks to the fact he was losing it in lots of ways. Even to the point that here's David, and he knows David, and he's very fond of David. And now in a different setting, he can't even recognize David. I don't know. See what you think. Wait.
Well, you're making the assumption that the chapters are in chronological order, which they may not be.
That's
Could all
possible.
be happening, coinciding,
It's a possibility.
Story.
Yeah, it's a possibility. I think you're right. Wayne.
The closeness that he had with, the way I can understand this, the reconciliation of the two, is the closeness that he had with David was not necessarily a personal closeness, but a closeness in the benefit that he provided for Saul as he played get that guy that plays the musical instrument.
Yeah, you know that guy. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah. And so that closeness could have been because of the relation, or because of the gift that David had of music and how that affected Saul.
Maybe so.
And not a personal.
Okay, maybe so. What, Monty?
Similar to what Wayne was saying, David was somebody that was there in the court often enough because he played for Saul, but he was going back and forth to take care of the king also. And so when he's singing, it might be that it was a face that he recognized, and he'd been introduced once before, but Saul, as king, had been introduced to lots of people. And so it might have been a face he recognized, and then when he's coming back with Goliath's head, he looks, "Hey, whose boy was that now? Remind me of who's this."
And sometimes we recognize people in certain settings, and we wouldn't recognize them otherwise. Maybe you knew this guy because of a work relationship you had with him, but if you saw him out at a ball game someplace, maybe you wouldn't recognize. Do I know that guy? You knew him at work, but he's not in the work environment now, and you see him in a different setting. Maybe you don't recognize. Sarah, do you have a thought?
Just that it says that he became his armor bearer, so that really does suggest a real close relationship.
Yeah,
And people change a lot.
that's true. I think you're right. So it's an interesting thing to speculate about. It's not a critical point, but it's kind of interesting to think about. Okay. Yes.
So in chapter 16, it said he was a valiant, mighty man. Well, how did they know that until he showed himself with the Goliath?
Maybe, but he's going to, before the Goliath episode, he's going to tell how he killed a lion and a bear with his bare hand. So, I mean, he had proved himself even before Goliath that he was a valiant man. So, I don't know. But I think your explanation is a possibility that we have because not all, have you noticed in our daily Bible readings lately, we read through the book of Jeremiah, did you notice how the assignments in Jeremiah jump all around the chapters? Because the chapters in the book of Jeremiah very definitely are not in chronological order. So that's a possibility. Okay. So skip into chapter 17, the Goliath episode. Chapter 17, verse 4. There went up, so the army of Israel, the army of the Philistines are arrayed against one another. They have not engaged yet in battle, but the battle is fixed. The troops are in battle array. And it says in verse 4, there went out a captain out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And then, of course, here's the challenge. Verse 8, he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. All right, so we know this story excellently, right? The little kids downstairs at the classes study this with regularity. David and Goliath. He's 6 cubits and a span. Now, we've always defined a cubit as roughly the distance between the tip of your fingers and your elbow. And we always estimate that at 18 inches or 1.5 feet. If he's 6 cubits, that's 9 feet and a span. He's something over 9 feet tall. I mean, he's monstrous. He's just enormous. And of course, you can read more descriptions about how about the armor that he wore and the spear that was carried and all of that. And so he's extremely confident. He goes out before the armies of Israel on a regular basis and presents this challenge to them. Just send a man. Send anybody. Send your best man. And if he kills me, we'll serve you. If I kill him, you serve me. And of course, it just struck fear in the army of Israel. They were just terrified of this possibility. So in verse 15, it says David had returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And it says in verse 17 that his father, Jesse, said to David his son, take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to the brethren, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000. And look how the brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they of the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David is sent from his father to carry provisions for his brothers and some gifts to others in the army, which probably was very much the way the armies were provided for. Their provisions came in such fashion in those times, I would imagine. And so David comes bringing provisions for his brothers and for some others. And of course, it says that, of course, he did as he was instructed to do. But while he's there, the Goliath comes out and makes his consistent and regular challenge. In verse 24, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. So, verse 26, David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. What's your thinking on that? Was David inquiring selfishly? What would be in it for me if I were to pick up this challenge and go against this giant? What do you think? What do you think the king would be willing to give me? What do you think would be done for me if I was willing to go out and meet the giant? You think that's it, or do you judge him differently from that? Monty?
In the verse before, he just heard 25, somebody was telling what would be done for the man that killed that Philistine. And it's, to me, it's like David saying, what did you say would be done for? It's not that he's greedy or looking for the reward, because we find out later when he does have an opportunity to marry Saul's daughter, he said, who am I to marry to be a son-in-law of the king? I'm not worthy. So I don't think he was looking at that so much. It's just he wanted to make sure he was clear on what was said. Somebody had said, here's this great reward that's going to be for the man that killed him. Now, what you say, is that how it really is going to be?
Yeah, I think you're right. We should have read that. In verse 25, the man that killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches and give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. So that had already been stated. And so David, I think as Monty says, David, repeat that to me. But I've got a little bit of different take on the last part of verse 26. He's saying, so the king is offering this, but the fact of the matter is, this uncircumcised Philistine is defying the armies of the living God. That to me seems to be what was motivating David more than anything. I don't think David said, the king's going to do what? Who is this guy? Why are you letting this guy defy the armies of the living God? So I sort of take it more that he was not selfishly looking for a reward. He was more wanting to remove this reproach that was upon Israel, that was being foisted upon them every day by the giant Goliath. All right, we know the story well, but it's so interesting. Isn't it? Skip down to verse 34. Of course, now before we do that, verse 28, his brothers rebuke him. Eliab, the eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. He said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thy heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. So his older brother, as you can imagine, is not impressed. That's sort of the way it is with siblings. He's my baby kid brother. I mean, are you kidding me? I'm supposed to be impressed by him? He's just my little brother. And you see that reaction. Skip down to verse 34. David said to Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and I smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. So I think we always point out David's confidence here was that God would be with him. Just as he credited God with protecting him when he was challenged by a lion and a bear, he believed God would be with him in this battle as well. Now, you know well that Saul tried to outfit him with his armor. David said, Can't do that. I haven't tried it. I haven't proved it. This armor's not for me. And so what he did, of course, in verse 40, he took his staff in his hand and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. We understand that the sling wasn't a slingshot like we had when we were kids. This would have been a leather pouch with 2 strings, and you would put a stone in the pouch, and then you would sling that thing around it, and then at the appropriate time you'd let loose one of the strings, and that opened the pouch, and the stone would fly out. Now we know, of course, that the end of the story is that he nails Goliath right in the forehead with this. You don't do that by accident. You are proficient with that sort of a weapon by much practice. And so there's no doubt that David had practiced a lot using a sling and a stone. One of the points that is often mentioned is that he picked up 5 when he crossed the brook. He picked up 5 smooth stones. And the question is always, how many did he need? He only needed 1, but he took 5. In other words, he was well prepared in his mind for the challenge that was before him. There's a bookstore up in Bowling Green, and you may see their advertisements from time to time, and it's called One Stone Bible Bookstore. And it's a reference to this, that David used just 1 of the 5 stones that he had taken. But he prepared himself with 5 stones, and he went out to meet Goliath. Verse 40, we already read that. Verse 46. So he is not back down. When Goliath comes out to meet him, verse 46, this day will the Lord deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee and take thy head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all the assembly shall know that God saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted, ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So, again, we know that story very well, but just the confidence and courage that David had. And I think, again, it goes all to the fact that he trusted God. His confidence was in God, that God would prevail in this matter. So, how many sermons and lessons have you heard preached on David and Goliath? So he was facing overwhelming odds, right? The potential for success here by human estimation would have been almost zero, effectively zero. There's no way a shepherd boy with a sling and the stone is going to be able to meet this giant of a soldier who's experienced and well equipped. There's just no way. And yet it happened. And again, I think when you read through that story and the repeated confidence that David expresses that the Lord would provide the victory. You know, verse 47, we sing a song, "The battle belongs to the Lord," right? And that's obviously where the songwriter got that notion. And that was David's confidence. Wade?
Not really talking about a lot, but a bear is probably, 8 foot or so. Probably weighs, 300-400 pounds, which you would think probably Goliath wouldn't have been much bigger than a bear. And for a young boy to go after a bear that big because of a sheep, that's a lot of confidence. You wonder, too, if God maybe had prompted him at some point. Of course, the Bible doesn't tell us. But he already had experience, and he knew he wasn't afraid of the bear being that big. And so Goliath, for him, I wouldn't have thought Goliath, in his mind, he's like, I've already done this. I can do this again. But it didn't seem like he approached Goliath in the same way as he did the bear, because he said he grabbed him by the beard.
But again, the confidence being that God was with him in that matter. He believed God was with him in the case of the lion and the bear. He believed God would be with him in the case of Goliath. So his confidence was wholly in the Lord. All right. Lots of sort of inspiring information there in the case of David. Of course, we know that as a result of this, David became a famous character in Israel, as you well might imagine. Here's this episode where this Philistine giant has been taunting and humiliating the armies of Israel, and David provokes a victory. So not only did David kill Goliath, but then the army of Israel rose, being encouraged by that result. They rose and they routed the Philistines. And so really deliverance came to Israel because of what this shepherd boy had done, and the people were overwhelmingly impressed. In verse 6, it came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets and with joy and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day forward. Saul has turned out to be a bad guy. You know, there were some glimmers of goodness and greatness in Saul initially. But by this time, Saul has just become a possessed man. He's just overwhelmed with this jealousy that against David, because he's being praised more than Saul's saying, he's getting more praise than me. How can this be? And so that turns his heart against David, and he's going to do his best to kill David. And of course, it goes several chapters follow this, in which he's pursuing David. He's seeking out every opportunity to kill David. More than once, David has a chance to kill him and doesn't. Again, it's kind of a really good lesson we get in that. David always regarded Saul as the Lord's anointed. He was God's chosen one to be king over Israel. And David respected that. He honored that. Even though Saul was not an honorable person, he honored this position that Saul held as God's anointed king. And he would not raise his hand against him. Chapter 24, look at chapter 24. Kind of an interesting episode. One of the instances where he could have killed Saul if he wanted to. It says, Saul's pursuing David, and in the course of pursuing, verse 3, chapter 24, verse 3, he came to the sheep cotes by the way, where was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet, and David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. So David and his men were actually hiding in this cave because they were being pursued. And Saul goes in there. The King James Version very delicately says he went in to cover his feet. Other translations will say something like he went in there to relieve himself. He went in there to go to the bathroom. And David had the chance to kill him, but instead he's close enough to him that he cuts off the corner or edge of his garment, and Saul doesn't even know that it's happened. And then after Saul leaves the cave, David calls out to him. And he has the corner of his garment. He has evidence. I could have killed you if I wanted to, and I didn't. And again, that scenario repeated more than once. But look at verse 10, chapter 24, verse 10. Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how the Lord hath delivered thee today into my hand in the cave. And some bade me kill thee, but mine eye spared thee. And I said, I will not put forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the skirt of thy robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe and killed thee not, know thou, and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in my hand. And I have not sinned against thee, yet thou huntest my soul to take it. The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but my hand shall not be upon thee. Again, he just points out, I could have done it, and I didn't. You are the Lord's anointed. And more than once, so that happened more than once. And more than once, Saul said, you're a better man than I am. You're more noble than I am. And acted like he wasn't going to pursue David anymore, and then turned right around and pursued him again. So Saul's a very unstable guy at this point in his life. He's a very unstable person. But again, you got to respect David's view toward the authority invested in Saul. Even though Saul was a bad man, David respected the position that he held. All right, quickly, we're going to run out of time. Skip over. There's a lot. There's a whole lot to the story of David. We're just touching the hem of the garment here. We just talked about the hem of Saul's garment. We're just talking about the hem of the garment here. Skip over to chapter 11 of 2 Samuel. And of course, there's a very horrible episode with Bathsheba. And you know, it is so hurtful to the legacy of David that the thing that he may potentially be most remembered for is the sin with Bathsheba. I would argue it'd probably be a toss-up. If you ask people, what do you remember most about King David? I suppose it'd be either Goliath or Bathsheba. But it's a sad commentary that Bathsheba ranks right up there in David's legacy. Chapter 11, verse 1, it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried still at Jerusalem. There's always some question of why that was so. I don't know. I don't even have an answer. The Bible doesn't address that. I suppose all kinds of speculation could be offered about that. But he sends Joab out with the army. He stays back in Jerusalem. Verse 2, it came to pass in the evening tide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. When David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? When David sent messengers and took her, and she came in unto him, and he lay with her, for she was purified from her uncleanness, and she returned into her house. And the woman conceived and sent and told David, and said, I am with child. Again, sadly, we know this story too well. Someone asked, and it might be, a kind of a good exercise. At what point and in what ways could David have avoided this happening? Well, first thing is when he viewed her, he could have turned away. When he saw that she was in a compromised situation, and a lot of people point out it's probably her fault that she was in a place where she could be seen in that way. Maybe so. I don't know. But when he saw her, the very first and logical thing he could have done is just turn his eyes away and go on about his business in another way. But he allowed himself to dwell upon what he had seen. So there was escape route number one that he just ignored. He sent and inquired about her. So now he's taking this up a notch, right? So he didn't just look, now he wants to know who she is. He finds out that she's another man's wife. She's the wife of Uriah the Hittite. By the way, we know that Uriah the Hittite was one of David's mighty men. He was one of his main army, I guess you'd call him an officer. At least he was a very significant, he was in that inner circle of David's mighty men. He was a noble warrior in David's army. When he finds out she's another man's wife, he goes, oh, okay. I mean, we won't inquire further. We won't pursue that anymore. He does not. He sends for her. And then, of course, they have an intimate relationship. She conceives a child and sends word to the king. Now, sadly, that... So, I guess the point that we want to make here is when temptation confronts us, we need to look for the way of escape. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has taken you, but such is common to man. But God will, with the temptation, also make a way to escape that you may be able to bear it. That was true for David. I mean, you can spell it out here. That was very true for David. But I'll tell you, it's true for us too. It's always true. That's a Bible truth. God will make a way of escape. And so David had those escape routes, and he did not take them. Monty?
Paul told Timothy to flee lust. David didn't flee this. He actually pursued it. He investigated it further. Like you said, there's several points in this when he should have said, as king, he already had multiple wives, so apparently it wasn't wrong. So I can see how possibly he would have investigated. But when he found out when she's somebody else's wife, that should have been the end. He should have turned and went the other way. Yeah. But he didn't flee that lust. He walked right off into the middle of it.
I think you're exactly right. Wait.
I think the next thing, and another important point is, when you get caught in the sin, you should just admit your guilt and ask for forgiveness and go the other way. That's not what David did.
He tried to
cover
it
up.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Wayne. Now you guys got to quit raising your hands simultaneously. Wayne.
This is the easy passage to show the progression progression of sin.
Yeah.
He saw a woman bathing on the rooftop. That's the temptation phase. He could have turned away, like you said, but then sin inquired. So he begins to act upon that temptation. And then sin becomes full grown when he says he took her.
Yeah, exactly right.
So-
Yeah, perfect illustration of, as you say, the progression of temptation into sin. Exactly right. So we probably don't have time to read, but you know how he tries to cover it up with Uriah. So he sends for Uriah under the premise that he wanted to report on how the battle was going. But he wanted to get Uriah back in town so that Uriah could have relations with his wife, so that it would be assumed that the child was Uriah's, and Uriah doesn't play the game. And so he gets the report from Uriah, and he says, wait till tomorrow, and he sends him home. Uriah won't go. He sleeps at the doorstep of the king's house with the hired servants. And so he tries again. This time he gets him drunk and sends him home. He won't go home. Uriah is such a devoted soldier. He says, my captain is in the field. He's sleeping in tents with the army of Israel. And I'm going to come home and enjoy my house and enjoy my wife? No way. There's no way I'm going to do that. And so David realized he's not going to. So that was his first effort at deception here, to cover up his sin. And it doesn't work. So he sends Uriah back to the battlefront with actually his own writing of execution in his hand. He carries a note. He personally takes his own note back to Joab, and David has written to Joab, put Uriah in the heat of the battle, and then when the battle is hot, withdraw yourself from him so that he will be killed. And Joab does. Joab's a bad guy, right? We know Joab, David's captain of the army, is a bad person. Joab has no qualms with that. He'll do just exactly as he's told. And he does. And so Uriah's in the battle. He's in the middle of the battle. He's in the very heart and heat of the battle. And the troops withdraw from him. And he's left alone, and he is killed in the battle. And a messenger comes back to David. I always think this is interesting. Verse 22, chapter 11, verse 22. So the messenger went and came and showed David all that Joab had sent him. And the messenger said unto David, surely the men prevailed against us and came out unto us in the field, and we were upon them even in the entering of the gate. And the shooters shot from off the wall upon thy servants, and some of the king's servants be dead, and thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. The better part of that is verse 19. When thou hast made an end of telling the matter of the war unto the king, if it be so that the king's wrath rise upon thee, and he say unto thee, wherefore approached ye so nigh unto the city when ye did fight? Knew ye not that they would shoot from the wall? Who smote Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal? Did not a woman cast a piece of millstone upon him from the wall, that he died in Thebez? Why went ye nigh the wall? Then say thou, thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So he said, I want you to go and give this report. And I know what David's going to be mad. He's going to say, why did you get so close to the wall? Don't you remember how Abimelech was killed when a woman threw a millstone off the wall and killed him? Why in the world would Joab allow the army to approach so close to the wall? And he says, when he says that, then you say, and Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Oh, I get it now. And it didn't play out exactly that way, but when he added to his initial report that Uriah the Hittite is dead, David said to the messenger, verse 25, thus shalt thou say to Joab, let not this thing displease thee, for the sword devoureth one as well as another. Make thy battle more strong against the city, and overthrow it, and encourage thou him. And so David gets what he wants. But we believe, and the scripture text would bear out that he is basically complicit in murder here. Uriah was murdered in this method, and it was at the command of David. Monty?
As we mentioned, we have to really admire Uriah the Hittite, because here David knows that this man, his honor and his integrity is so extremely high that he can send this letter back to Joab that's going to get Uriah killed, knowing full well that Uriah is not going to look at it.
Yeah.
He's going to deliver it to Joab like he was told to, and that's going to be the extent of it.
Yeah.
And so you really have to admire Uriah the Hittite.
Yeah, seems like a great person. Our author of our questions referenced Proverbs 28, verse 13. He that covereth his sins shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. That's certainly applicable to the case of David. And then we're just out of time. But of course, in chapter 12, we know well how Nathan the prophet came to David. And I tell you, an individual that I really admire is Nathan the prophet, who comes to David to confront him about his sin with Bathsheba. David has the power to kill this man on the spot. So Nathan does such an amazing, tells the story about the farmer who had lots of sheep, but a guest came and he went to a poor man who had just one little ewe lamb who was his family pet, and he took that and killed it to feed his guest, and David is outraged. He is so angry. How could that happen? This man is going to pay. He's going to pay for what he did. And then Nathan said, "Thou art the man." Oh man, you talk about driving the dagger all the way into the heart. I mean But to David's great credit, and I think this is the thing we always point out, instead of trying to argue and justify himself and offer all kinds of extenuating circumstances for why he did what he did, David said, verse 13, David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." That's all he said. He didn't try to quibble. He didn't try to excuse himself. "I have sinned against the Lord." And so then we know the consequences that follow. There's so much in the life of David. Great lessons to be learned. And again, I really feel like it's such a sad commentary on David's life that one of, if not the most remembered thing about him was his sin with Bathsheba. But when you talk about that, you have to acknowledge how he dealt with the sin. He sinned. Well, men sin. But in his case, he is to be admired for how he confessed and obviously repented of his sin. Thanks, everybody. Lord willing, we'll take up the next lesson next week.